On the 30th of November in 1989, an electronics store owner grabbed a hooker from the side of a Florida highway and drove to a secluded area for what he presumed would be a good time. Unknown to him, the woman in his car was pure evil, and this quest for pleasure would, unfortunately, lead to his tragic murder. His body, found weeks later in the woods with 2 bullets in his left lung, sent the police on a desperate hunt for one of the most infamous female cold-blooded killers the world has ever seen. In a story of how hate, revenge, and unhealed trauma pushed a woman into 7 murderous crimes, this is the disturbing case of Aileen Wuornos. Before joining the serial killer hall of infamy, Aileen Wuornos was born in 1956 into a dysfunctional family that set the stage for her deeply troubled childhood in Rochester, Michigan, the United States. Her mother, Diane Wuornos, had her when she was just 16 after being married to her father, Leo Pittman, for 2 years. However, 2 months before Aileen was born, Diane filed for divorce from Leo and resorted to raising Aileen and her elder brother as a single mother. But things only got worse. Aileen's father, Leo Pittman, was as evil as they come, engaging in criminal activities like kidnapping and raping a 7-year-old girl, for which he would be caught and made to serve a life imprisonment sentence. While behind bars, Leo was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and shortly after, he took his own life by hanging. As a result of this tragic circumstance, Aileen never got to meet her biological father, and as if the absence of one parental figure wasn't enough, her mother also abandoned her and her brother, leaving them in the care of their maternal grandparents, who were both alcoholics, while she was just 4 years old. Although their grandparents legally adopted them, the siblings had nothing close to a normal childhood under the elderly couple's roof. But Aileen got it worse as their grandfather assaulted her sexually. He would frequently force her to take off all her clothes when he was drunk before proceeding to beat her to a stupor. This constant maltreatment and abuse by a man who was supposed to be family planted an unmovable hatred for men in Aileen at a young age, a feeling that would later overwhelm her and inspire the murderous crime spree she became famous for. Misdirected by her trauma and having no one to turn to, Aileen began trading sexual favors at school for illegal substances, cigarettes, and even food when she was just 11. This opened her up to the unforgiving world of sex work from a young age, and this resulted in her getting pregnant at just 14. Aileen gave birth to a boy child at a home for unwed mothers, and she immediately placed him up for adoption before dropping out of school to avoid the stigma that came with such a young pregnancy. But life had much more in store for her. Around the same time, her grandmother died of liver failure, making her grandfather vexed to the point that he threw her out of the house as he blamed her for his wife's passing. This was how Aileen Wuornos, just 15 years of age, ended up on the streets of America, prostituting to make ends meet while she lived in an abandoned car not far from her old house. And when sex work wasn't sufficient to keep her afloat, she turned to crime. Aileen Wuornos' criminal record started slowly with a DUI and disorderly conduct charge for firing a .22 caliber pistol from a moving car in 1974 while she was 18. However, before she turned 25, she had scaled to more serious crimes like robbery and was arrested for mugging a convenience store for $35 and 2 packs of cigarettes, for which she spent a year behind bars. She also got arrested for forging a bank check in 1984 and was named as a suspect in the theft of a revolver and ammunition in 1985. Despite her criminal tendencies, Aileen Wuornos managed to get married to a 69-year-old yacht club president, Louis Gratz, shortly after the two met in Florida, a decision the man would almost instantly live to regret. Upon their marriage, Louis Gratz noticed Aileen was much different from the girl he had fallen in love with. She became increasingly violent and frequently engaged in bar fights. But what surprised him the most was when he became a victim of this violence. Aileen regularly assaulted her husband physically, beating him with his cane on one occasion. which led him to file for a restraining order against her just several weeks into their marriage. The duo eventually dissolved their union, and Aileen moved back to Michigan after her elder brother tragically died of esophageal cancer, leaving her $10,000 from his life insurance fund, which she squandered away recklessly in just 2 months. After her purse ran dry, Aileen once again got back into the life of crime she was now familiar with, and in January 1986, she was arrested in Miami on charges of car theft, resisting arrest, and providing fake identification to the police. A revolver and a box of ammunition were found in the car recovered from her. Also, in June of the same year, she was arrested again for robbing a man of $200 at gunpoint after he had engaged her in sexual services, a crime that became routine for her. Aileen's story seemingly reached a tipping point in 1986 when she met Tyria Moore, a 24-year-old waitress at a Daytona Beach gay bar who she fell in love with at first sight. Now 30, Aileen got into a relationship with Tyria and asked that she move in with her. And when this happened, she began prostituting more often to take care of both their needs. However, her newfound soulmate did little to curb the demons that raged inside her, and Aileen Wuornos' hatred for men grew stronger every time she had to trade her body for money until it ultimately drove her to do the unthinkable in the fall of 1989. On the 30th of November, 1989, Aileen was out for her usual prostitution rounds in Florida when she met Richard Charles Mallory, a 51-year-old man who picked her up and drove to an abandoned area where they agreed to engage in sexual acts, but things did not go as planned. Mallory was an electric repair shop owner who had been divorced for many years and didn't take any guilt in engaging the services of hookers for his pleasure. However, at the end of the night, Aileen shot him 4 times with a 9-shot revolver, killing him in his car before making do with a camera, a radar detector, and some of his properties, which would lead the police to her after she tried to pawn them to make some extra cash. Richard Charles Mallory was Aileen's first murder victim, and that night she crossed a dreadful line that there was no coming back from. Although she would claim in a statement when the police caught up with her that he had attacked, raped, and sodomized her, leading her to use a gun in self-defense, Mallory's murder was only the beginning of a dark timeline in Aileen's story, as things got a lot more disturbing from there. Aileen dumped her victim's body in the secluded area and drove off in his car before abandoning it several miles away from where she had violently ended his life. 2 days later, the abandoned vehicle caught the attention of a Volusia County deputy, prompting the police to begin a search. On the 13th of December, 1989, Richard Charles Mallory's lifeless body was found in the woods with visible bullet wounds that could only mean one thing: a killer was on the loose. What led Aileen to commit this grave crime remains a mystery to date, but taking one life was not enough for her. Being a victim of cruelty at the hands of men for such a long time, Aileen felt she could take power into her own hands. And after a cool-off period of 6 months, she struck again, this time with more intent. On the 19th of May, 1990, David Andrew Spears, a middle-aged construction worker, was driving along Highway I-75 in Florida when he came across Aileen posing for her usual night job and thought to engage her services. He picked her up and drove a while to an area with little human presence, where he pulled over and began to undress in preparation for the act. But instead of Aileen doing the same, she slipped out of the passenger side door, walked around the car to the driver's seat where Spears was, and shot him 6 times with a pistol. One shot never seemed to be enough for the cold-blooded Aileen Wuornos, who became known as the Damsel of Death when her serial murders were brought to light. It wasn't long before David Andrew Spears' murder was picked up by the police, as his son, who saw him leave for work, filed a missing persons report when he didn't return and was unreachable for days. Like Mallory's case, the police came across an abandoned vehicle with a flat tire on Highway I-75. After running its identification number through their system, they found it belonged to Spears, who had been earlier declared missing. This prompted a full investigation into his disappearance, and after 2 weeks of searching, Spears' lifeless body was found in Citrus County, miles away from Highway I-75, and without any clothes. While Florida police were still occupied with uncovering who was behind Richard Mallory's murder, another disturbing case fell into their hands, and it would be too late before they could draw a connection between the two crimes committed 6 months apart from each other. Aileen, on the other hand, became even more vile, drunk with revenge and hate for the gender she blamed all her problems on. Her killings increased in frequency, and barely 2 weeks after her second murder, she struck Florida again, this time giving her victim a more gruesome death than she had previously dished out. Charles Edmund Carskaddon, a part-time rodeo worker 40 years of age, was Aileen Wuornos' unlucky third victim. On the 31st of May in 1990, he was returning home to his fiancée from a trip to visit his mother when he tragically crossed paths with Aileen, who was now well settled into her sadistic routine. He picked her up from the shoulder of the road, not knowing the face of the woman whom he had invited into his car would be the last thing he ever saw. And just like her other victims, he would lose his life on a chase for fleeting minutes of pleasure. In her usual fashion, Aileen waited until Charles pulled up at a remote location and began taking off his clothes before she stepped out of his vehicle and shot him a whopping 9 times with a .22 caliber weapon until she was sure that he had died. Aileen then went on to steal his car and some other of his belongings, including a gun, which she pawned for some cash later on, a behavior the police described as collecting souvenirs from her murders. Charles Edmund Carskaddon's body was discovered by the police about a week later in Pasco County, wrapped in an electric blanket and badly decomposing, causing terror to sweep through Daytona Beach. Although this city in Florida had already amassed a reputation for harboring many societal ills like prostitution, outlawed motorcycle gangs, and illegal drug trade, an unknown serial killer on the loose was the least of the things the police bargained for. Aileen went uncaught after her first 3 murders, and this drove her to become more passionate about her criminal activities. By now, she had honed her techniques, and there was no quenching her bloodthirst, making her strike again less than a week after her third body. Her fourth and oldest victim, Peter Abraham Seams, was a 65-year-old Christian missionary and retired sea merchant, which made his case as ironic as it was tragic. Aileen was out for her sex work on the I-75 Florida highway on the 7th of July when she came across Seams. He had intended to travel to Arkansas to distribute several free Bibles he had carried on the trip, but for some reason, he ended up with Aileen in his car, and this very act tragically cost him his life. Aileen made away with Seams' vehicle, and unlike her other loots, she drove it for almost a month before abandoning it, but this eventually became her undoing. She was riding with Tyria Moore to see the fireworks in Daytona Beach when she noticed that she had driven into a reserved area of the Ocala National Forest and decided to turn back. But she was driving too fast, causing the car to slide off the motorable path into the woods and become stuck. The duo tried all they could to get the vehicle up and running, but their best efforts proved futile, leaving them to abandon it there in the forest. That was when some witnesses spotted their strange behavior and reported what they saw to the police. The police arrived after Aileen and Tyria were long gone to find Peter Seams' vehicle in the Ocala National Forest, 50 miles west of Daytona Beach, and upon investigation, they noticed the plate number and some important documents had been removed from his vehicle. However, when they ran the VIN through their systems, it was revealed that the vehicle belonged to Peter Abraham Seams, who had been filed as a missing person, a shocking discovery that brought them a step closer to solving the plethora of murder cases they had on their hands. The vehicle was towed out of the forest and brought in for further forensic investigations, from which the police found pawn shop receipts Aileen Wuornos had left behind when she abandoned the car. But what eventually led them to her trail were fingerprints she left on the driver's interior door handle. This significant breakthrough overjoyed the police, and for the first time in 7 months, they could see a clear pattern with these murders, as they all involved middle-aged white males who either drove attractive vehicles or trucks. Thanks to the pawn shop tickets, they began trailing a woman who had become their prime suspect in this vicious serial killer case. The hunt for Aileen Wuornos was on. One receipt found in Peter Seams' car was for a box of tools. which happened to be one of the things stolen from David Spears' car, while another was for a camera and radar detector that had been missing from Richard Mallory's vehicle. These, combined with Aileen's robust history of felonies revealed by her criminal record, led the police to believe that the puzzle was solved and they had identified their killer. But this wasn't, however, the case, and their hunt was far from over. The police also searched the area extensively for Peter Seam's body, believing it held clues that would be helpful to their case. But after weeks of looking with no success, they gave up, and his body was never found. On the other hand, Aileen Wuornos and her lesbian lover, Tyria Moore, who was not yet fully aware of her abominable deeds, stayed in a motel, not knowing they had become wanted suspects in the center of a police investigation. A few weeks later, Aileen would strike again. Aileen Wuornos' fifth murder victim, Troy Eugene Burris, was a 50-year-old sausage salesman from Ocala, Florida, who had been on a delivery run in Daytona Beach. After making a few stops in the city, Burris sighted Aileen prostituting by the roadside and pulled over to engage her services. In the same fashion as her other victims, Aileen lured the salesman into a secluded area and initiated sexual acts with him before tragically shooting him twice at point-blank range and dragging his body out of his truck, which she left at a Florida highway intersection. It would take 5 days for the police to discover Burris's lifeless body on the 4th of August, 1990, in the woods along State Route 19, after stumbling upon his truck on State Route 40 in Marion County. But once they did, they knew whoever was behind it was the same person that committed the other murders, and they had to catch her fast. However, before the police could make any significant progress in finding Aileen Wuornos, she took another man's life, leaving them both frustrated and terrified. Aileen's sixth murder victim enraged the police greatly, as it involved a man who had once served within the force. On the 12th of September in 1990, the lifeless body of Charles Richard Humphreys, a retired United States Air Force major, former chief of police, and former state child abuse investigator, was found in Marion County after he took 7 bullets to the head and torso at the hands of Aileen Wuornos. The previous day, Humphrey was driving along Highway I-75 when his eyes caught the attractive sight of Aileen Wuornos posing on the roadside. He picked her up, and the two drove to a remote location a few miles off the highway in southwestern Marion County before he pulled over to complete his business. As Aileen slipped out of the passenger seat, he also stepped out of the vehicle, and then she shot at him 7 times, with one shot to the chest discovered by forensics to have been fired from a close, non-contact range. His body was discovered the next day, fully clothed, while his car was found in Sewanee County, making police intensify their hunt for the woman, now referred to as the Damsel of Death. Aileen's murders had become increasingly brutal with every new kill. Homicide investigators could tell she was enjoying herself while she snuffed life out of the victims with her gun, as she used far too many bullets than was necessary to end them. While the police tried to track down Aileen Wuornos and put a stop to her murders, she struck again, this time killing a man who was an officer, a blow the force could not take lightly. Walter Geno Antonio was a 62-year-old truck driver, security guard, and police officer who served as a reserve deputy sheriff with the Brevard County Sheriff's Office in Florida. On the 19th of November, 1990, Antonio's lifeless body was discovered by the police almost unclad and with visible bullet wounds near a remote logging road in Dixie County. Upon investigation, he was found to have been shot 4 times from close range. This killing style was consistent with the previous murders the police had on their hands, and 5 days later, Walter Antonio's car was found abandoned in Brevard County. Aileen Wuornos made away with some personal belongings from the cop's car, like handcuffs and flashlights, delivering a mighty blow to the police force with yet another cynical murder. At this point, the police became perplexed with the case and had no choice but to release a composite sketch of the 2 women they had obtained from the witnesses who saw Aileen and Tyria abandoning Peter Seam's vehicle in Ocala National Forest. This was the moment that changed everything in their favor. In less than an hour of releasing the sketches to the public, the police began getting calls from people who identified the woman as Aileen Wuornos and Tyria Moore. And soon, these callers led them to set up undercover operations in some biker bars around Daytona Beach. Police from all over Florida were stationed in different bars where they disguised themselves as regular people as they looked out for any sightings of Aileen and Tyria, until one found her shooting pool at the bar where he was stationed. Mike Joyner, the police officer who identified Aileen, fought hard to keep his emotions under control, with his heart racing fast as fear ran through his spine. After informing the case task force of whom he had just seen, Joyner spied on Aileen from a close range, trailing her for 3 days until he eventually made a move to get closer to her and initiate a conversation like someone looking to engage her sexual services. The duo shared some beers before Aileen agreed to follow Joyner to a motel room, not knowing that she would be walking into a police ambush. On the 9th of January, 1991, Aileen Wuornos was arrested at the Last Resort Biker Bar in Volusia County. The police feared she might get violent and attack, putting civilian lives in danger if they moved to arrest her while she was inside the bar. Hence their idea to lure her out with the help of undercover officer Mike Joyner. Tyria Moore would be located the next day in Pittston, Pennsylvania. And although she was not arrested, she followed the police back to Florida, where she was booked into a motel and kept under surveillance. The police questioned Tyria, who claimed to know only a little of Aileen's criminal history, with nothing related to her murderous stint, but agreed to help the police get a confession from Aileen Wuornos in exchange for immunity in the case. The police had hit the jackpot, but their fight was far from finished. Although the vicious damsel of death was now behind bars and her reign of terror had come to an end, they still had to prove beyond reasonable doubt that she was guilty of the crimes levied against her. And this was where things became tricky. While Aileen was locked up behind bars, Tyria, under the supervision of the police, made numerous calls to her, pleading for her help in clearing her name from the cases that she knew nothing about. Aileen granted her lover's request, and 3 days after her arrest, she confessed to the murders, but claimed she had committed all of them in self-defense, and the men had all tried to rape her before she ended their lives. This added a new twist to the case, and soon her confession divided the public's opinion about her, with some pro-sex work groups claiming she may have been right to murder her victims and could have been raped, as this wasn't a strange thing among sex workers. On the 14th of January, 1992, Aileen went to trial for the killing of Richard Charles Mallory, for which her defense attorney tried to make a case of her mental instability after multiple psychiatrists had diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. To the surprise of everyone, she suddenly pleaded no contest to all the murders she was charged with, saying she wanted to get right with God. In her words, "I wanted to confess to you that Richard Mallory did violently rape me, as I've told you, but these others did not." In light of this, she received 6 death sentences over the next 3 years for her murders, not being charged with the murder of Peter Seams, whose body was never found. In 2001, after spending almost a decade on death row, Aileen Wuornos wrote a shocking letter to the state Supreme Court asking that all appeals on her behalf be dropped. "I killed those men, robbed them as cold as ice, and I'd do it again too," she said in her letters. In October 2002, she was moved to Florida State Prison, where she would be executed after having a cup of coffee for a last meal while watching an orchestra perform. Aileen Wuornos' case became a hot topic in true crime and was adapted into countless documentaries, but one stood out as it made people more conflicted about her story. While on death row, Aileen sat for an interview with filmmaker Nick Broomfield, and when she thought the cameras were off, she told him that her murders had all been in self-defense, but she could not bear being on death row any longer than the 10 years she had already served and wanted to die.
Nick, I've been through so much hell, I can't even think of something there right now. And I'm so burning fucking mad about how I gotta wait for my execution. I wanna get in the fucking chamber tomorrow and leave. And then they play, since I waved off, I've had nothing but psychological and physical fucking problems playing with it because I'm on hold with my execution. I'm so fucking mad I can't see straight. And they're just daring me to kill again. They got me pissed. United States Supreme Court, I'm telling you, man, you motherfuckers keep fucking with my goddamn execution, there's gonna be bloodshed. I'm sick of this. Get that fucking warrant signed.
And that brings us to the end of today's video. What do you think about Aileen Wuornos' case? Let us know in the comment section. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more. See you in our next video.